You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 on Instagram and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold. Today we welcome in Jim Andrews, president and co-founder of Precedent, a platform streamlining information exchange and negotiation between law firms and insurance carriers. Jim's currently in Santa Barbara, California. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here, Ben. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, likewise. I'm glad we got a date that worked for both of us. I'm definitely waiting to hear about Precedent. Read up on it a little bit. Cool name, by the way. It's that was like one of my favorite words in law school and favorite terms, and of course, it's something that we all learn about, precedent. So something that's definitely easy to remember. So
Well,
uh,
we're trying to set new standards around here, and so
yeah,
it's all part of the name.
yeah, no, that's awesome. So Jim, just as it is in the spirit of Lawyer Stories, just tell us a little bit about yourself. You were the co-founder of Carpe Data, and you worked for one of our law students' favorite LexisNexis. So, like, tell us about those experiences a little bit.
Absolutely. So yeah, pretty much right out of college, I worked for one of LexisNexis's a company that they owned called Insurity. So it was within LexisNexis Risk Services, so not on the legal side at all. Somewhat coincidentally, I'm the youngest of three brothers. My middle brother is actually a plaintiff's attorney in
Oh,
Seattle,
okay.
and
Wow.
during law school, he not only used LexisNexis but worked there,
Okay.
selling whatever their discovery product or public record search products were.
Okay.
But so I worked with the group that really engaged heavily with insurance companies, and that's where I started my career in insurance technology. I was there for about 3 years, and then in 2010, my oldest brother, so not the plaintiff's attorney, but the other brother,
Okay.
uh, he and I and another gentleman started a company called Carpe Data. And the original thesis of the business was sort of all things risk management using social media and
Wow.
other publicly available web data. But after about, not every startup story is an overnight success, and
Yeah.
certainly applied to us. So after about 5 years of trying to do too much, at one point we did work with the federal government. We did work for really high reputational risk companies like top tier consulting firms and investment banks. And we also worked in insurance. Uh, because we all had a background in insurance, we decided, hey, let's just focus on what we know. Let's focus on the insurance business. We spun out the background screening. We sold the federal government work to a big contractor and just focused on insurance. And really, out of that grew what became sort of the final incarnation of Carpe Data. That was acquired by a private equity firm in 2022 called Thomas H. Lee Partners out of Boston.
Wow.
And yeah, it was really exciting for everybody. It was obviously super special for me to be
Yeah.
something that started with three guys and a probably pretty bad PowerPoint, and that company's still doing really well.
What's that
And
like? So let me just ask you a question, just out of pure interest. Like, what's that like selling a startup? I mean, like you said it started off with three guys, and then like, a pretty bad slideshow or like PowerPoint, and then all of a sudden you got somebody like acquiring this business. Like, do you keep a hand in that at all, or is it just like they cut you? You're just sort of that's it.
well, the management team was all retained, so this
Okay.
was a growth investment. So we had a lot of success, particularly from call it 2016 through this day, but through the acquisition. And so so they were very bullish on keeping the team intact. And that process was, again, it was a 12-year thing that to
Wow.
get from where we started to the acquisition. And I always say, the highs are never as high as they feel, and the lows are never as low. And that's kind of what life is like at a startup, right? There's sometimes you don't get paid, right? You miss a paycheck, or you have to make some tough decisions, and you get really excited about a great meeting or a great proof of concept, and people make decisions that you don't have influence over, and it doesn't work out that way. So, but on the whole, it was amazing. Something that I wish everybody could experience, as far as that, having that, really being so close to a business and feeling like everything you do at every level of the company is really meaningful to its success.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So then you tell us after that, after the acquisition, you moved into Carpe Data.
So yeah, after Carpe was acquired, I actually got connected to one of my co-founders, Grant Little, through a friend that was previously an executive and the CEO of an insurance company. So that insurance company was acquired by Allstate. And so this friend of mine introduced me to Grant and said, the insurance market really well, technology, and Grant's, a technologist and an operator and really sharp guy, and thought, you guys could do something really interesting together. And this mutual friend of Grant and I's happened to, have the capital to help us do that.
Nice.
So we got together sort of formally. We started the company in early 2023 with our CTO, Logan Chittenden, and our chief data scientist, Derek Stuckey.
Wow.
So Logan came from Amazon. He had sold a company to Amazon and called Say Hi. It was part of their speech to text language translation, and fairly relevant to a lot of the Alexa technology.
Okay.
And Derek had a background obviously in data science, but worked at Groupon, worked at another kind of sort of consumer focused, company that dealt with massive amounts of consumer data. And prior to that, he worked at Booz Allen on the defense side, actually. But so the four of us came together. We sort of said, there's a lot of dysfunction and because Grant had come from really grown up in claims and understanding the pain points of having these really big organizations with lots of process and lots of people, and how hard it is to deal with a lot of disparate, non-standard, inconsistent data that comes in inbound.
Mhm.
And from plaintiff firms, particularly, if you think about, there's tens of thousands of plaintiff firms on one side of this equation and hundreds of insurance carriers, and there's no standardization in the way that they interact. And I always had an insurance company perspective on the matter, just because that's where I grew up, was dealing with insurance companies, working with them. But in talking to my brother, who's a plaintiff's attorney, it really helped me kind of understand more of the 360-degree perspective on what the problems were and potentially ways to solve them. And that's really sort of at the highest level what Precedent does. Our ultimate goal is to help that injured person get back to their life.
Mm-hmm.
But behind that, sort of how do we do that? It's by trying to, and we've had success so far, standardize, digitize, and modernize the way that plaintiff firms and insurance companies interact, because you've got these two disparate markets. There's no standardization in the way that the communication happens. There's still faxes that are being sent. There's obviously emails that get lost. There's physical mail that's still sent to offices.
Yeah.
So working with those parties, and that's what Precedent, what we want plaintiff firms to think about is, if I need to deal with an insurance company, it doesn't matter which one it is, I just deal with Precedent, and they know how to deal with all the insurance companies. And similarly,
Wow, that's amazing. So stop right there. So Precedent is going to know how to deal with all of the insurance companies, basically. So
Correct.
that's crazy because insurance is like super complicated. I think there's so many like layers to uncover with insurance. I don't know. Maybe you'll talk about that later, but it's just that is pretty incredible that you've come up with and created this idea and put it together where it'll handle all of these insurance companies.
Yeah, and doing so in all of the points in which a plaintiff firm would reach out to interact with that insurance company. So if you're an attorney and you have a new client come through the door, they haven't even set up the claim yet. They haven't even called the person's insurance that hit them. So being able to take that work off of the plaintiff's attorney or their staff and say, hey, just send a request to Precedent. That'll get set up with the carrier, and in different, sometimes we make that call ourselves. Other times we have a digital way to do that really speeds up that process. And for the plaintiff's firm, that helps them know, well, I had to set this claim up anyway, but later on, what we do in that process is also confirm, was this coverage even intact at the time of the accident? So it probably won't surprise you to know that there's a lot of people out there driving that don't have insurance.
Yeah, right.
And that's why it's important for everybody to have uninsured motorist and underinsured motorist insurance, right?
Sure.
So for that firm to know, okay, the person that was in this accident with my client, they have insurance with, Acme Insurance. We're just going to say Acme here to not pick on anybody.
Sure.
And then understanding, okay, does that insurance company accept liability? Are they saying, yes, their driver caused this accident? And then in certain states where disclosure is required, actually finding out what are the limits for this given policy so that I can make sure that my client gets treatment directed in a way that's going to help them, again, get back to full health or as close to that as possible, but also doing it based on an amount of money that they feel comfortable spending and not having to come massively out of pocket to address their injuries.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. I feel like we could break down a lot more that like within that. That's so can we
Well, and I didn't even get to the next step, which is the actual creation of the demand on behalf of the plaintiff firm and getting that digitally delivered to the carrier so that that gets acknowledged and reviewed more quickly. And again, something that sets us apart from others that may do outsource demand, or even if you generate demands internally, is our connectivity into the insurance carriers, so that for a number of very large carriers, if you want to digitally deliver your demand, the only way to do it, because of the relationships that we've set up with them, is through us. And so that means your demand's received and acknowledged within 24 hours or less, instead of that current process for a plaintiff's firm is calling, did you get my demand? Calling 5 days later, did you get my demand? Oh, we did, but actually now it's with this adjuster, not that adjuster that you sent it to. Right, so really helping them cut down on those phone calls, on those emails, and all that unnecessary interaction.
And so you said that this works with every insurance company?
Correct. And we think about that as either we have active participants, so carriers, and we've really been focused on the top of the market because that's frankly where the most volume is, especially for motor vehicle accidents. But setting up specific, for lack of a better term, pipes into those companies to get that information delivered, whether it is setting up a claim or determining coverage and liability and potentially the limits, or actually just getting that demand delivered. And then we also think about passive, which is because of the volume of interactions that we deal with certain insurance companies, we've also gotten really good at understanding, okay, what's the best mechanism to get this delivered, to get that acknowledgement, to get whatever information back that a plaintiff firms need.
So Jim, let's start like from the beginning. Like say that let's start like the case from the beginning. So say there's like a car accident. Tell us what like how I mean I think I understand it, but I just want to be clear about it. Like how does precedent comes in? So like somebody calls their attorney and they say, "Hey, like I got into this accident, And then so what would happen? Like where does precedent come into everything?
So that attorney would obviously sign up that client. and then
Yep.
say, can you provide me with, hopefully at least the insurance information, potentially a police report from that,
Okay.
right? If that firm's working with Precedent, they would send just that basic information about the client, the insurance, and the police report to us. We're going to get that claim set up in less than 24 hours. And that may be sort of somebody in your seat might sound, well, that doesn't sound, that's somewhat trivial, but it's very tedious. Oftentimes you're on hold for an hour if you're just calling the main line or trying to get through to a claims adjuster because of, depends on what time of day it is or just the volume of accidents.
Sure. Yep.
And so what those tasks often get deprioritized at the plaintiff firm because there's more urgent matters for things that are due in court the next day, or there's a trial, or whatever other priorities take place. And so for a firm, by submitting that request to us, and not just that request, but all of those claim setup requests, they're taking that administrative burden completely off of their firm and allowing their folks to really focus on much more high skill, less tedious work, right? They're either focused on helping clients or working on casework or just doing other things that are way more valuable than sitting on hold waiting to talk to somebody.
Right. Okay. So you help with like the process. You expedite the process right to the insurance. It's like let's get this info into Precedent, and it's going to go right to the insurance. So what so what tell us about like the genesis of like the problem that you're solving, like what, so I think we just kind of touched on it, but
yeah, I can go a little bit more in depth for you, Ben. So
yeah
I actually wrote a blog piece that was published last week about this, and the title of it was "What the Facts."
Oh, and by
Because
the way, yeah, I saw that on LinkedIn, and we'd love to put that on our website if you want to send that over at some point.
sure, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
But I mean, it's kind of attorney insurance nerd history here, or plaintiff firm. But going back to, I believe, the late 70s, there was a case that reached the Supreme Court where attorneys, essentially it enabled attorneys to advertise, right? And that helped consumers become much more aware of, if you're having a frustrating experience with an insurance company or you're just concerned about your lack of knowledge in the process, you can be comfortable hiring an attorney, and that attorney is going to try to get that best outcome for you. And then in the early 90s, Geico really, but then others quickly followed, really massively started to market in a way that had not been seen before. And insurance used to be a agent based. Hey, this guy on my bowling league is an insurance agent, or somehow I know somebody that's an agent. That's who I buy my insurance from. Well, Geico and some other big carriers really changed that model to a degree by going direct to consumer and advertising, and that's where the Caveman and the Gecko, and then Progressive, you've got Flo, and you've got Jake at State Farm, and Mayhem at Allstate, and Peyton Manning and Nationwide, all that stuff, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
And what that did was consolidated the market quite a bit, right? So one of the things that, again, insurance nerd factoid is about 70+% of the personal auto market, so the insurance that you and I buy for our cars that we drive around town, is controlled by the top 10 carriers, right? So that consolidation has continued to increase over the past 30 years. So more consolidation, there's more advertising. And then about 30 years ago, the insurance industry started to see more attorneys on claims. So there were more often, and it started to build. It used to be 30 years ago, 1 in 10 claims, there was an attorney representing the claimant. Now it 50, 60, some venues, it's 70% have an attorney. And to your problem, the genesis, or your question, pardon me, about the problem and the genesis, is that attorneys and insurance companies are still interacting as if it's 1994, and they kind of interact sometimes, right? It's like, no, if there's 3 million injury claims a year and half of them have an attorney, and the number is actually higher than that as far as the total number of claims and attorneys. But that means that there's 1.5 million interactions happening with no standardization, no consistency. Again, still sending paper documents that get scanned into a mailroom and then get imaged to a file, and sometimes the scan doesn't work, right? There's just a lot of opportunities to improve.
That's really interesting what you said about 1994. It's like the number of cases with attorneys or plaintiffs being represented with attorneys against insurance companies has skyrocketed, where like the consistency or like the has kind of stayed where it was in like 1994, right? Like so that's really interesting.
Yeah, the technology used.
The technology used, yes.
Or
That's interesting, Jim. That I mean, and that I think that's huge. And like you found like this gap in the in the system to like sort of expedite and bring it up to speed.
Well, and that been ultimately the thing that's been most enlightening for me over the past year is that there is one very common goal. And before I say that, I'll say that on every call, regardless of talking to a plaintiff's firm or an insurance carrier, I'm not here to tell an insurance carrier you're going to pay less. I'm also not here to tell a plaintiff's firm you're going to get more. I'm here to say we're going to resolve things more quickly and significantly more efficiently. And why I brought that up is because in the plaintiff's firm world, there's a metric, time on desk, right? How long from when you get this case to when it's settled. And sometimes you can even track the effort that goes into that on an individual case. But the same metric exists in the insurance world, and it's called cycle time. So a claim or a case is like a fish, and the longer it's out, the more it stinks, right? So, and I bet there's plenty of attorneys sitting on this listening to this podcast that would say, if I went and looked at my data, I have much better performance on stuff that closes in 4, 6-ish months than, unless it's a big, very involved case. But if you've got two similar cases that are both, $50,000 of medicals and whatever other sort of specifics to them, and one is processed in 6 months and one is processed in 9, I can tell you that 9-month case is not going to be as good for anybody, including the insurance company.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's so tell me where it goes beyond getting to the desk. Like how does the case keep moving? Like, do you guys have any? I mean, you have some systems that assist with that.
What the things that we do to keep the case moving, right? So like we talked about upfront, setting that claim up and determining, okay, is there coverage here? Because if there's not, no attorney, unless they're feeling really, really generous, there's not much they can do besides potentially then work with the first party insurance carrier, right?
Yep.
And currently, to put some numbers behind it, the firms that we talk to say typically it takes them 25 to 30 days to find out, is there coverage? What are the limits? Things like that, right? We're doing that in often less than 10 days, most of the time less than 5 days, right?
Wow.
So now I've got much more immediate information to work from to understand, what are the particulars of this case, and some of the other stuff I talked about previously about, okay, how can I help direct them to what medical care they can actually afford based on the insurance that's available. And then our latest product is called Demand Composer. Mm-hmm. And that's a product that, again, to speak to efficiency, but also to standardization to a degree, is making the process of building a demand much more simple. So we have the ability to provide a firm with their templates, right? They can work out of, and multiple templates. So if every office has a different template, or if certain case types have this template, certain case types, it doesn't matter to us. Send us all your templates. Mm-hmm. You'll be able to come into our platform and select, hey, I want to use the Springfield, Massachusetts office template for this. And then, oh, no, I'm going to use the Worcester template, right, for this one, because that's what office it's out of. And then all that firm needs to do to start is upload those supports. So the police reports, the medical records, the MRI, that type of stuff, images, etc. And then in as little as 4 hours, but no more than 24 hours, we're building out a demand, again, that's in their template, but they can further customize it from there. If they want to add specific narrative, if there's some things they want to make sure that they highlight. But what we do as well to enable the efficiency on the insurance side is at a minimum direct or make suggestions about what is the best way to lay out this so it's highly consumable for the insurance company. Because while every case is different, insurance companies, because they're so big, and we talked about that consolidation, and they're so process driven, they really don't have time to overanalyze subjective things about a case. So that really heartwarming story about they used to do this and now they can't do that, that's not as impactful for them as just understanding what are the facts of the case. Do I have all the supporting information? What was the medical treatments? When were they done? What did they cost? What is there a life plan? Is there other things? And they use tools to standardize their evaluation so that they can make an objective decision to start that negotiation.
Wow. Okay. And AI is sort of weaved in there somehow.
Yes.
So tell us how AI is used with Precedent.
Yeah. So, and particularly on the demands. So there's, I believe, 18 different models that we use, and some of them are sort of in concert because this model is this step and the next model is that step. But they're used to do everything from pull in all of those medical documents and understand, what is this MRI versus chiropractor, and then extract all of the details from that. Because, as I mentioned before, a lot of the critical information, and all of the firms want to review their medical documents before they send them over as well. Understand, okay, what was the treatment, and make sure that whatever the total medicals in the demand are actually match the bill. It's kind of important, right? So we use our various AI tools, and we really take a best of breed approach. So working with Microsoft or Google or OpenAI, or whatever is the best in the market at that particular task that we're trying to accomplish. And it is different for images versus text versus other things. So using AI to identify and extract all that medical information, but then also using AI to do things like evaluate the CT scan results, the MRI results.
Wow.
And again, present that information in a format that's consumable for both the plaintiff firm as they kind of finalize that demand, as well as eventually the insurance company. And additionally, we're releasing ability to build a narrative, to actually customize your narrative, potentially eventually also, as the system learns, write the narrative in your voice. Now, I'm not here to say AI is taking any lawyer's jobs ever, because at the end of the day, every good lawyer reviews everything and if they're going to put their signature on it, they're going to review it in detail. So that's some of what we're doing with AI, and really for us, AI is a big part of what we do, from a actual executing or building the products, etc. But we're a neutral platform that sits between the plaintiff firm and the insurance company, that's trying to facilitate a much more faster and more modern interaction.
That's awesome. I love that. So tell us why neutrality is important with Precedent. Being neutral, I guess.
Because it would be really hard for, as we get more critical mass, more volume, to go to an insurance company and actually get them to potentially change process around what they do. And also, we think that's important ultimately to continue to condense these timelines to make things resolve more quickly. And so in having those relationships with the insurance carriers and working with them to say things like, if you'll set up a special front end for us to submit claims, we will never submit a fraudulent claim to you, because some of the reasons that they've pulled back for the broad market, things like digital claim submission, is they were getting too many fraudulent claims submitted, right? So they need to have that trust in us. And, like with the demand delivery, saying, look, this firm is going to commit to sending 100% of its demands through Precedent. You're committing to acknowledge these things within 24 hours and accept that anything that comes from Precedent is seen as if it came from that firm. So it's really just to make sure that both sides feel that we're not favoring one over the other. We're ultimately favoring that claimant or client to get that case resolved as quickly as possible.
So what do you think makes the insurance say, okay, like this is coming in through Precedent rather than this is coming in through the law offices so-and-so? Like, why are they sort of like looking at this differently and like maybe expediting? And
well, if I had to put some numbers to it, if you, again, broadly speaking, but this is probably directionally accurate. If you think about a company like Progressive or Geico or State Farm, they might get 1,000 or at least 500 demands a day that could be coming from 500 different firms in 500 different formats through potentially fax, email, physical mail, sometimes all three, right? So for them, they've invested quite a bit of money in just figuring out, where are my demands, where are they coming from, how can I flag them? So for them, we're adding value in creating certainty around the fact that, hey, what you're getting from Precedent, it's a claim setup request, it's a coverage request, it's a demand, right? So if this relationship at the highest level there wasn't so much friction between the two parties, that we probably wouldn't have to exist. But ultimately, it is a relationship where either side is representing a different interest, but that doesn't mean that they can't be, because they're required to work together. That doesn't mean they can't find a better way.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I like that. So who is Precedent sort of aiming the system towards? Is it like small firms, medium firms, big firms, solos, any of the above?
Yeah, of course, I'll say all of the above.
Yeah.
Right now,
Yeah.
we've had success, kind of at every level that you described. If there's people that want to sign up, go to precedent.com or we'll talk to any firm that's, a plaintiff's firm. But there's no specific market segmentation that we've done. We have a customer that he sends one demand every other month, and that's fine. And we have customers that send hundreds of demands a month, so we're not discriminating on plaintiff firms or anybody.
Yeah, no discrimination here. All right, good. So we've talked about why the collaboration between law firms and insurance is so important, and I think that's huge. I mean, you always see these like social media posts of like, I got the policy limits, I got this, I got that, and so Precedent sort of is like this intermediary that's almost like not really a mediator, obviously, but something that's sort of in between that both parties can use to communicate.
Well, and if you think about, even if State Farm's the largest insurance company, Progressive getting closer, but State Farm's still number one. And even if they wanted to set up the same thing that, well, we're just going to build Precedent, but we're going to build it for just State Farm. Well, they would have to go to all these thousands and thousands of plaintiffs firms and get them to do it. And some of these firms would say, well, I only interact with you once every other year. And so for us to be able to work with all of the insurance companies to create the standardization and say, we're going to take on building the other side of the market and creating that critical mass, so that, because I think ultimately the carriers would really like to have this type of digital interaction, but it's so unwieldy for them to go work with the plaintiff firms, recruit them, but then the plaintiff firm has now 300 different processes when they deal with insurance, instead of just, hey, again, back to where we started. I'm dealing with an insurance company, I go to Precedent.
So Jim, like, I'm sorry if you mentioned this somewhere, but I just want to have clarity on it. How does the negotiation process work between like lawyer and insurance company if the lawyer's like, no, we're not settling for that. Like, we need to, up that cost, that settlement a little bit more.
So there's still, well, I guess two answers. Number one, future of the company, we've actually done a beta test between a regional insurance carrier and an office for a plaintiff's firm, a local office for a fairly large firm, where we had them both submit 20 cases that they felt were ready for resolution, but blind, right? So neither side knew what the other side was sending.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, there was overlap on about 10 of those cases where they both, unbeknownst to each other, wanted to settle the same cases, but because of this dysfunction in the relationship, no one ever thought to say, hey, here's my board of stuff I'd like to settle, here's mine.
Mm-hmm.
And within this module that we haven't released publicly yet, but they were actually able to, start that negotiation. And obviously one starts high and one starts low, and resolve it. But I will not say that not all the cases resolved in the pilot. Some of them, obviously, like, it still needs to go to conventional mechanisms for resolution. And that sometimes that was just a phone call. Sometimes, it couldn't get resolved pre-suit, or it went to mediation, or whatever the next step was. But, we were encouraged by that. So that's really kind of where we're headed.
Okay.
And ultimately, we see a world where there's a settlement in the case, and then hopefully very quickly that settlement actually gets processed and sent to that firm, to that client, through our platform as well, instead of playing a game of, well, where do I mail the check and who has to sign this and that.
Right. That's great. So that's good. So that's something that's being thought of. So just remind us one more time about the administrative tasks that are being reduced by using Precedent, because it seems like there's just a lot that's being done.
I mean, you could almost say it as every phone call, every email, every fax, every letter that you ever had to send to an insurance company could be processed through Precedent, and specifically for setting up those claims, determining if there's coverage, determining the liability, determining the limits. And then even when firms send demands today, if they're not working with Precedent, they're following up often 5, 6, 7 times to find out, did you get my demand? Okay, when am I going to get a response? And then one of the other things that we do in our demand review process is actually do a quality check and make sure that everything that was potentially referenced in the narrative or in the summaries that were provided is there, so that there's not an additional follow-up of, hey, you forgot this medical bill, where is it? Right. So we're just trying to reduce all of those unnecessary interactions and ensure the quality of what's being provided to the carrier from the firm is what the firm expected they were sending, because there's been a lot of growth, as we've talked about, in the plaintiff firm market. Mm-hmm. And I think fast growth leads to operational headaches and sometimes a lack of consistency. So just doing things like making sure this is exactly what was supposed to be sent when it's sent, maybe, again, sounds trivial, but we see it more often than not when we work with firms where their demands are not quality assured before they're sent. There's a lot of errors in there.
So I'm sure plaintiffs' attorneys learn how to read the fine print on all the insurance documents, but when you send off an insurance document through Precedent or request for it, do they come back and tell you what the policy limits are without the attorney even having to go through all the fine print and read all the documents? Not that I would ever tell an attorney not to read the fine prints of the documents, but
in the states where it's required, and that's really been part of our engagement process with the insurance companies, to say you have to provide this information anyway, so why not do it in a more efficient manner.
Yep.
And so in those scenarios, yes, we're sending the requests for, again, but let's say you're in Florida, it's a statutory required to provide the limits, sending that request. Again, that's a situation where we've seen 7 to 10 phone calls just to get the limits on that case. And then it's been 30 days. Your client hasn't really had any, not a ton of engagement because you're in this information vacuum. They're sitting there wondering what's going on. So really, by bringing that down to often, again, it can be as little as 5 days till at least we get a verbal confirmation. Then we follow up to get the declaration pages to get sort of that written confirmation.
That's awesome. So what would you tell anyone thinking about using Precedent? Any attorneys out there sort of checking it out? And
I think that your staff will be very happy by the reduction in a lot of the effort that it takes to do these fairly rote tasks. I think ultimately it's going to be, I know it's ultimately going to be a benefit to your firm from both, reducing overhead and creating efficiencies, but also enabling the firm to have more time to engage with existing or new clients. And that you'll see ultimately a significant reduction in both the effort it takes to engage with the carriers, but also the overall time that is involved from when that case comes through the door till when your client gets that settlement that makes them feel, good about that whole situation.
yeah, great. So is this a yearly or monthly subscription? Like, how can people sign up, or is it just by like transaction?
So the majority of our pricing packages are a monthly subscription. First, again, I mentioned, the attorney that sends one demand every other month. So we do have
Sure.
more for demand composers specifically, more of a ad hoc if they would prefer. But of course, the pricing is more favorable based on the volume that's sent through.
Great. Jim, did we leave anything else out? Do we leave anything out that you wanted to share that I skipped over?
I don't think so. I mean, we'll be at AAJ this coming weekend. I'm excited for that. And then we'll be at the Big Truck and Auto Summit in Chicago next month. So no,
That's great.
Excited to be on the pod. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, this was awesome. It's great. I'm glad we finally got to do this. Super interesting stuff. I'm going to tell you when we go offline, I'm going to tell you about what we're planning with Lawyer Stories Connect and how, Precedent can be a part of that, be one of our preferred partners with that. But so thanks for tuning in, Jim. Thanks, Jim, for coming on and sharing about Precedent. We really appreciate it. And everybody else, thanks for tuning in wherever you are in the world today. Enjoy yourselves.
Thank you so much.
Jim, stay right there.